Only the distance of more than a decade after his death allows us to carefully analyze the terrible staging that British designer Alexander McQueen left behind when he killed himself. According to the testimony of his assistant, he was found hanging in his dressing room, there was a candle still burning on the floor, and his dogs were barking desperately at the door. The police report indicated that a copy of a book called The Descent of Man, which recounted the career of the artist Wolf von Lenkiewicz, was found at the scene, on the back cover of which Lee Alexander McQueen had written, "Please take care of my dogs, sorry, I love you, Lee. P.S. Bury me in church." His mother, Joyce McQueen, had died just days before, and the whole world assumed that the reason for his suicide had been this irreparable loss. However, his doctor, Dr. Stephen Pereira, said that Alexander felt under great pressure from his work in the fashion industry. On the one hand, it was the area of his life in which he had achieved something extraordinary. On the other hand, after every show he felt very depressed, isolated and withdrawn. Clothing, fashion, all that it entailed in McQueen's life turned out to be a gift and a curse at the same time. Very young, at the age of 16, he found work as a pattern maker and cutter at Anderson Shepherd on Savile Row, one of the tailors of Prince Charles of England. There he demonstrated his aptitude with chalk and scissors, and it was this trade that would lead to his death and into posterity. After a brief stint at Jeeves Hawks, he was hired by the theatrical costume manufacturer Angels Bermans, whose influence continued to be felt in his grandiloquent creations with almost operatic touches that made him so popular among musicians and celebrities. At the age of 20, he worked with Japanese designer Koji Tatsuno, before traveling to Milan to work with Romeo Gili as a pattern maker and cutter. Everything was shaping up for him to open his own fashion label, but he decided to finish his studies at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design in London, where he met the woman who would become his friend, muse and discoverer, the former editor of Vogue England Isabella Blow. She became a patron of sorts who invested in the young Lee's talent and suggested he use his middle name to create his brand, Alexander McQueen. In 2007, Isabella Blow committed suicide and Alexander dedicated his 2008 collection to her memory. The eyes of the world turned to this designer with his 1995 Higland Rape collection, whose spectacularity and violence, paired with a fineness of finish and haute couture, had never been seen on a European catwalk before. Such was the stir that the French house Givenchy hired McQueen to be the designer of its next collections, so that, without expecting it, he followed in the footsteps of John Galliano and was the second great English designer to be praised in Paris. In the documentary called McQueen, Alexander recalls that the Givenchy house was an exciting experience, but that the main reason for signing the contract was to secure the necessary funds to grow his own brand, and so he did. After 5 years in this house, McQueen ended his relationship with Givenchy, claiming that he was too restricted creatively and that, in order to realize his vision, he would have to change the roots of Givenchy's Parisian aesthetics. Thus, he returned to London to work once again on his own version of fashion. Undoubtedly, the most anticipated moment during every Paris Fashion Week in the decade from 2000 to 2010 was Alexander McQueen's collection, not only because of the prestige that a brand brings, no matter what it features, as happens with many of the great fashion houses, but because it was certain that he would develop a concept in a show that would be talked about for a long time afterwards. McQueen had the ability to synthesize complex historical and social issues in his creations, and in his latest collections, he explored the dark sides of fashion, his own psychology and human nature. His collections showed the fashion elite the things they dared not see, with a well-structured discourse in an indisputable couture wrapper. His pieces spoke of the violent and savage nature of the human being, at a time when the big labels sought in a mannerist aesthetic, an idealization of a lifestyle that does not exist in reality. His creativity covered a range that went from the dreamlike and fantastical to the most earthly and grotesque. Presented in an elegant way and with the utmost rigor in the craft, with this he managed to be not only a fashion designer, but an artist who, on the catwalk, played with sculpture and performance. One of Alexander McQueen's characteristics, as a person, was his total lack of arrogance. As the son of a cab driver and a teacher, he was a disruptive figure in fashion society because of his casual manners, humble birth and concern for his family, just as he was an outsider in his own family environment, having artistic aspirations and having been very clear, from an early age, about his homosexuality. Acceptance by his family was critical to him, although he had a strong and loving relationship with his mother. His father did not quite understand his profession and his world, and they were not on good terms with him until he reached a level of success. In fact, it is not uncommon to see him closing his catwalks with his parents, his friends, his loved ones, and even his dogs. He was proud and wanted to share his success with them and, at the same time, receive validation on a family and personal level. Despite his success and renown, McQueen was not immune to the unforgiving fashion system. The obsession with beauty and unattainable perfection. That feeling of inadequacy drove him to undertake cosmetic surgeries in order to have a personal image that would fit in line with the accepted standards of the field, to stop being the suburban, overweight teenager. To be the most famous designer in the world, he had to look the part. The depressive process he was in, which involved a lot of drugs and alcohol, can only be defined as the result of the imposition of high fashion on his creativity. It is impossible to view Alexander McQueen's collections without a hint of sadness, after knowing his personal history, his struggle, his family, his childhood, and the weight that the dictatorship of fashion and the prison of being a celebrity had on him. Undoubtedly, the death of his mother had an important weight in his decision to take his life, but it cannot be said that this was the sole reason. It was everything else and, on top of that, not having a home to return to where he could take shelter. The fact that he left his suicide note in a book by Wolf von Lenkovich is very telling. Why choose this artist? It was certainly an influence on him, and it is a reflection of his inner world and creative career. Von Lenkovich focused on religious, creationist, mythological and scientific ideas to elaborate a project of resequencing, a term borrowed from geneticists. Both artists used the existing language of images in a fantastic new visual syntax. In the manner of a 19th-century naturalist like Darwin. They catalogued the varieties of iconographic experience. They graphed multiple images to produce surprising hybrids of a disturbing and strange new order of species. Perhaps this is the way he aspired to be remembered. The scene of his death, the dresser, the candle, the dogs, and Lenkovich's book are not accidental. They are pieces within the final staging that evokes both his life and career, his inspiration, his creativity, and his quest. God save McQueen.